Welcome to the Low Tox Life podcast.
If we look at epidemiological studies worldwide, we find that vegans and vegetarians are actually no more likely to be anemic than people who eat meat as well. It's not the steak or the absence of steak which is causing your iron deficiency.
Hello, my name is Alex, your host, and today we continue the iron conversation. Why? Because we still have stones left unturned, and I have brought a wonderful naturopath and educator in the microbiome space for many, many years, Rebecca Edwards, to continue the conversations. There are other parts to the story when it comes to iron not feeling like it's good for us. So you might be the type of person who has tried every form of iron supplementation under the sun, and it either feels like it doesn't work, or it either feels like it makes you tired, or it makes you feel inflamed. There's a reason for that. So today we're exploring the role of the microbiome, in fact, the entire digestive tract, as well as the rest of the body, and the many players that feed into why you might be having trouble with iron, too high, too low, and not able to get what you need circulating properly. So that's what awaits us today. After these ads from our wonderful podcast partners who help you with your low tox swaps, we'll hook straight into it. If a healthy home is your priority right now, then AusClimate, our major podcast partner, without whom we could not put this show on every week, has got you covered with 10% off for Aussies. Code LowToxLife. Dehumidifying is a particular passion of mine because it helps us prevent moisture, excess humidity, and of course, therefore, mold in our indoor environments. Of course, if you ever have a leak or a flood, contact a mold technician or a building biologist. But for everyday living, you would be surprised the impact that good dehumidification can make in your indoor environment. I've done a ton of reels on this to help you know how long, what size of unit, how many units, different floor plans. Everything's there on my Instagram at LowToxLife, and you'll see all the white background tiles are part of a humidity literacy series. I hope it helps you. Head to ausclimate.com.au. They have heating and cooling solutions, amazing dehumidifiers, and their Winix air purifier range. Rebecca, how are you?
Hello, Alex. I'm really well, and I'm really excited to be with you and your audience today.
I'm so excited, and this introduction came via the wonderful Jules Galloway when I was talking to Jules about iron supplementation and feeling like we've done two excellent shows on it, talking about the need to test more thoroughly, the need to explore different types of supplements to suit different people. And I said, but here's the thing, Jules, do you have anyone who can fill in the gaps for us? She said your name. Here we are. Rebecca, can you share your practitioner perspective? Because I'd imagine when you study at, your Bachelor of Health Science and you're studying naturopathy, you probably just learn that much more once you're actually in clinical practice or working for different research companies over the years. What were some of the steps that helped you realize the iron picture, especially because it affects so many of us, is actually broader and broader and broader and broader, and we need to actually come at it from a much wider lens?
That's a very big question, Alex.
I know, it's like 3-day seminar kind of stuff, but give it a go. Give it a go.
That's all right, because actually a big part of my kind of educational mission, if you like, over the past couple of years has been presenting healthcare practitioner masterclasses actually on iron absorption, because iron is absorbed in a totally different way from any other nutrient. And so you really need to be thinking about iron in a totally different way from the rest of your nutrition and its absorption.
And so how do we stop that from confusing someone who still doesn't even know what to eat in this day and age? And they're like, oh, and now I have to become a biochemist who understands different forms of absorption?
Well, I mean, to be fair, iron absorption is confusing. And even, I'm going to be honest here, I think most medical professionals are going to remain fairly confused about iron absorption because it is so complex. I mean, I can kind of talk you through it from a really, let's take a little tour of the digestive system and from a high level perspective, what iron is doing that's so different. And talk about how your diet is usually not the main culprit when it comes to problems with maintaining healthy iron levels. We are very lucky in this country that we have access to plentiful foods which contain enough iron for us. And the thing to remember is that we only absorb a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the iron we actually put in our mouths anyway. The issue around getting the iron from our food into our blood is actually not about the food, it's about the absorption pathway. And I always want to kind of describe to people the fact that your iron deficiency is far more likely to be due to either something going on the lining of your gut, something in your microbiome, or something in your immune system. Far more likely one of those issues is the culprit than actually what's going into your mouth. So if we talk about, the normal pathway of absorption for almost any other nutrient that comes into our body via our diet is, we chew our food, and when we're chewing food, we're releasing different enzymes in saliva in the mouth, which begin to break down carbohydrate chains and just make our, a lot of our foods ready for absorption when they hit the lower part of the digestive tract. Then our food, we swallow it, it goes down the esophagus into the stomach. The stomach is an area where not much absorption happens. There are really only a couple of things that are absorbed in the stomach, and that's water and alcohol. We always mention that because so many people, understand that you take one sip of champagne and suddenly you feel tipsy. And why is that? Because it's about the only thing that can be absorbed across the stomach. So the stomach is just there to kind of churn things up and release, some digestive secretion, stomach acid. And stomach acid is where our story with iron absorption starts, because in our diet, iron is, as a mineral, doesn't come in our foods on its own. It comes bound to different substances. And in the diet, these are usually amino acids or proteins. So the very first thing that needs to happen is that the iron molecule itself needs to be essentially uncoupled from this amino acid it's bound to in the food. And that's one of the jobs of stomach acid. So one of the first things to keep in mind is, okay, we need to have iron in our diet. Most of us do. And by the way, it is a total myth that vegans and vegetarians are more likely to have their diet as the cause of their iron deficiency. If we look at epidemiological studies worldwide, we find that vegans and vegetarians are actually no more likely to be anemic than people who eat meat as well. It's not the steak or the absence of steak which is causing your iron deficiency. So we look at the stomach acid. We need to make sure we're producing enough stomach acid. And one of the issues for a lot of people, especially as they grow a little older in, nations such as ours, is they often start experiencing things like indigestion, heartburn, chronic coughs, and they find that these symptoms are improved by taking medications which impact stomach acid. So things like antacid pills or liquids or proton pump inhibitors.
Pumps,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know exactly where I'm going here.
I do.
And that, unfortunately, that can be a contributor to blocking the absorption of iron, because when you take a medication that prevents your stomach from actually constructing stomach acid, then you're reducing the ability of your body to actually uncouple these iron molecules from the substances they arrive bound to in our diet, and that's it. We just can't absorb them. So that's one of the first things to look at. Then if we continue following our iron in our food as it moves from the stomach, where it's been churned up into this, acidic soup along with everything else we've eaten, and it then is pushed into the intestines, which come after the stomach, the top of the intestinal tract, the top of the small intestine, the duodenum, this is where almost all of our nutrient absorption takes place across the wall of the upper part of the intestinal tract, and our nutrients kind of slowly make their way from the interior of that tube, which is our intestines, into our bloodstream. But iron does things a little bit differently, and there's a really good reason for this. And that is that, and this kind of comes back to something you said just a few minutes ago, that you yourself have found that taking iron doesn't make you feel great. And you're definitely not alone. And this is something that's really interesting, that iron is one of the prescribed medications with the lowest rate of long-term compliance. What we mean by that is that the majority of people who are prescribed an iron supplement actually stop taking it within either a few weeks or a few months, more so than just about any other medication they're prescribed.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry, go for it.
I was going to say the reason is the side effects, but
yeah. So people are going, this either hasn't made me feel any better, so what's the point in spending the money, or it's made me feel worse, so why would I be spending the money?
Yeah. Yeah, or even not necessarily the money, because at their most available, say across the counter in your pharmacy, iron's not an expensive intervention.
So right. Yeah.
It's so much more about, this is not making me feel good. And the most common side effects of iron supplements include, gastritis. So again, like irritation of the upper digestive tract. They can actually cause that reflux and heartburn feelings, stomach pain, constipation, nausea, vomiting for some people. It can even cause intestinal bleeding for other people. Some people really don't like the kind of really sticky tar-like stool that can occur when you take iron. And there's a really good reason that iron is doing this to your body. And that is that iron is what we class as a primary toxicant. And what that means is that it is essentially a highly oxidative substance. And, again, to kind of break that down even further, iron is a substance that causes cellular damage. There's a reason that your body makes iron jump through so many hoops that we haven't even finished describing yet before it will be absorbed, and that is for protection. To put it at its most, I think, evolutionarily interesting, the human body has no pathway for the excretion of iron. And this is one of those facts that I think I'll often kind of sit there and ponder, because I have a really weird brain, and I'll just kind of think about, wow, this is so interesting. Did we just forget to somehow evolve a pathway that allows us to shed iron? And it's fascinating when we look at the history of humans and different nutrients. And iron it's the only nutrient for which we have no pathway of excretion. If we think about things like our B vitamins and our antioxidants.
Yeah, you get your yellow pea if you've had too much vitamin B and all the, we know those
You
ones.
just kind of wee out the excess. But not with iron. And this is mind-blowing. You have molecules of iron in your bloodstream right now that your mother passed to you across the placenta, that have never left your body. They have just continually been circulating. It's kind of trippy, isn't it?
Wow. And so circulating how? Circulating...
Mainly in your blood. So iron is one of the ingredients, if you like, or your components of a protein called hemoglobin, which carries oxygen molecules in your red blood cells. So all of the iron that you've ever absorbed into your bloodstream is continually being recycled and put into your red blood cells. And this happens in the liver. The liver is, I often describe it as kind of the busiest organ in the body. It's got a lot to do. It's busy.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
It's very environmentally responsible. Your liver, it does a lot of recycling. And one of the substances it recycles on an endless cycle is iron. So because we never lose iron that we absorb, we just keep on putting it into the construction of new red blood cells. Red blood cells have about a 90-day life cycle, and then they are actually broken down and their component parts reused. And that's where we just keep on using this iron. So what this means is that the only way we ever lose iron is when we lose blood, essentially.
I was going to say, that's why they encourage people with hemochromatosis to give blood and,
Exactly, because that's the only way you're going to get rid of it. So this means that most of the time we don't really have a lot of need to take in a lot of iron. We're only ever replacing the tiny, tiny amounts we lose through any incidental, blood cell loss, or, we do lose iron through just normal skin cell shedding. So for example, the cells that line the intestinal tract, enterocytes, they're the shortest lived cells in the body. They only live 6 to 8 days. So every time we lose, the kind of inner layer of our digestive tract, we're losing a little bit of iron that goes into constructing those cells. Whenever we lose kind of skin cells, again, we're losing tiny, tiny amounts of iron. But most of the time, we just don't have the need to take in large amounts of iron. And it's estimated that most people are only absorbing somewhere between 1% and 5% of the dietary iron they take in. So
and does that include supplementation?
That's a really good question. We actually absorb even less of an iron that we take as supplements. And again, there's a really good reason for that. And it comes back to what we've just been talking about. The fact that the reason we are our bodies are so cautious about absorbing iron is it's a potential damaging substance. Like I said before, iron is, it's an oxidant, so it can cause oxidative damage to tissue, but there's more than that. Iron is a fuel source. And, we know that because I'm sure everybody knows what it feels like to have low iron, or you've known someone with low iron. You feel exhausted because iron is so important for energy. And it's not just humans who use iron for energy. Iron is actually a fabulous fuel source for microbes, for bacteria, for viruses, for different forms of life. And what this means is that an iron-rich environment can exacerbate the proliferation or the spread or growth, if you like, of an infection. So your body doesn't want you to absorb high amounts of iron as a protective mechanism.
Yet it doesn't know what to do so much with the extra stuff.
This is a really good question, because this is something I find is not really often discussed, that there's a lot of discussion around why am I not absorbing iron? What is the best form of iron supplement to take? But what we often don't think about is when we take an iron supplement, what happens to the iron we don't absorb? So if we go back to the duodenum, the upper part of the digestive system, and let's talk for a second about the various things that have to happen to iron before it makes its way from the digestive tract into the bloodstream. So we've talked about going through the stomach acid being essential for decoupling the iron from the nutrient it's bound to in our food. Then it arrives into the small intestine. It's ready to be absorbed, but several things still have to happen. And one of those is most of the iron we eat in our diet comes in the form of ferric iron. And those of us who have, memories of chemistry will be able to picture the symbol for iron, which is Fe3+.
I remember that much.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Fe3+. And the 3 denotes the number of electrons in the valence of that form of iron. The thing is that the cells that line our digestive tract, the enterocytes, those very short-lived cells, they can only absorb ferrous iron, or Fe2+. So our dietary iron has to be reduced before it can be taken up by our enterocytes. And this is where we have a really special chemical reaction that has to occur, which is the reduction of ferric iron. This happens via a digestive enzyme called ferroreductase. The thing I love about enzymes is they usually tell you what they do in their names. So ferroreductase, it's reducing ferric iron.
And if someone were to buy a complete digestive enzyme, is that in bog standard ones that you buy? No,
it's not. You've got to make your own, and you make your own. You make your own in the brush border. And the brush border is the name we give to the microvilli. These are tiny hair-like projections which exist on the surface of what we call the villi, which are finger-like projections which line the duodenum. So let's think about it like this. Think about the environment of your duodenum as being like a beautiful landscape of rolling green hills. And the rolling green hills are all of the kind of folds of your intestinal lining. And on these green hills, we've got beautiful trees growing, and that's why they look green. Think about the trees as the villi. The villi are these, like I said before, these finger-like projections that kind of wave away on the lining of the duodenum. And so essentially they're there to provide more surface material for the contents of your stomach to really kind of slosh around on, to make sure that all the food that your stomach has just churned into this acidy mess is coming into contact with the lining of your duodenum in the form of these fingers.
I'm picturing a car wash and all those fingers trying to like get all around the car.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they want to come into contact with everything that you've eaten. Now, lining those fingers are these microscopic little hair-like projections. If we go back to thinking about our duodenum as these rolling green hills, and we've got the hills, the structure of the duodenum, with the trees, which are the villi. The leaves on the trees are the microvilli. And it's in these little microvilli where we produce digestive enzymes. And by the way, this is where we produce lactase, the enzyme that breaks down lactose. So we produce a whole bunch of enzymes which help us absorb different carbohydrates like lactose in there. But we also produce the ferroreductase enzyme in there. And this is the enzyme which is essential for reducing that ferric ion to put it into the form that our enterocytes need. So this is where we come to the next checkpoint, if you like. Anyone who has any duodenal damage is not, their journey with iron absorption ends right there. That's it. They can't absorb iron.
Wow. So I'm going to let this continue because this is super important and very interesting for us to really understand what's going on. And then we're going to come back, just in case anyone thinks, why are you leaving the duodenum? How do I fix my duodenum? How do I get that back in shape? That is where we're headed. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, we are heading there for sure. So what happens next? Let's say we've got someone with perfect stomach acid, perfect duodenum, lots of ferroreductase. They're able to reduce that ferric ion to ferrous ion. That ferrous ion is then ready to enter the enterocytes, the cells that line the duodenum. But they actually can't get in on their own. They need a transport protein. So think about it here as they need to cross a border and they need to catch a bus to cross the border. Now that bus is called the divalent mineral transporter. And this is like a bus that has a limited number of seats, which is the only bus that can cross this particular border. And the thing is that anyone can get on this bus if they have the right ticket. And the right ticket to get on this bus is that you have to be a divalent mineral. So let's go back to the whole story with the ferroreductase and the reducing of ferric ion. So remember, we had 3 valencies in the electron of that ferric ion. We needed to reduce it to 2, which is what the ferroreductase did. When you are a mineral which has 2 electrons in your valence, that means you are a divalent mineral. Yeah. And this is the Fe2+. But the thing is, many minerals in our diet or in our supplements are absorbed in that divalent form. So the form of calcium that we absorb is Ca2+. The form of zinc we absorb is Zn2+. The form of copper we absorb is Cu2+. And this special bus that is needed to drive the iron into the enterocyte, all the seats on that bus can be occupied by any divalent mineral. This is where we come to the next issue with the absorption of iron. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with the understanding that taking iron at the same time as zinc or calcium can reduce its absorption, and this is why. Because the calcium molecules can barge ahead of the iron and take up all the seats on the bus. And then that transporter protein becomes essentially full with transporting calcium or zinc or copper, or actually a lot of toxic metals also come in that divalent form, and they can easily block iron absorption. So that's the next thing to consider is what are you taking at the same time as your iron supplement? If you're taking it with your zinc supplement, if you're taking it with a glass of milk, which is high in calcium, you're going to be reducing the availability of that transporter protein to actually carry it into your enterocytes. So far, we've had issues with the stomach acid. We've had issues with the health of the duodenum, the production of ferroreductase, and then other minerals which might be blocking the absorption of iron. We can see that already there are so many things that have to go right for iron to be absorbed. Now let's assume we've got this person who's got, perfect diet, perfect stomach acid, perfect duodenum, got a lovely environment where iron is not being blocked by other minerals. What happens next? So iron enters the enterocytes. Now, remember the enterocytes are really short-lived. They only live about a week. And then they come to the end of their life cycle and they're actually lost. And what that means is they basically are shed into the intestinal cavity and they form part of fecal loss. So actually most of the iron that makes its way into enterocytes never ends up in the bloodstream. It's just ended up being lost as enterocyte loss, a cellular loss. What happens to iron,
hold on.
Sorry.
I have a question. So
Yes.
is that a scenario where we are pooping out some of the iron?
Oh yeah, we definitely. We are pooping out almost 100% of the iron we take in.
Got
because it will, most of it never makes it as far as the enterocytes. And we'll come to what happens to that iron in a moment. We'll continue following the journey of the iron.
I'm following the journey.
Yeah.
Take us there.
And it's such a journey. It is such a journey. So, I'm exhausted even just thinking about it. Imagine what it's like for the poor little iron molecule. So they've made it into the enterocyte, but how do they then make it into your bloodstream? There's one more enormous journey they have to take, which is across the basolaminal membrane. And this is the membrane that divides the enterocytes, those cells which line the digestive tract, from your bloodstream. And in order for iron to actually be absorbed, it's got to make it into your blood. Now we have, it's a different transport protein, essentially, that allows iron to move into your bloodstream. And this has another really cool name, ferroportin. And I love...
the door. Yeah.
Yes, the door, exactly.
I remember talking to Dr. Libby about this, and as soon as I heard it, because I'm French, la porte is the door.
Yes,
so,
of course. Yeah. I mean, we love the Latin in medicine, well, I do anyway. So, ferro referring to iron, portin, exactly, referring to door. So this is a special door.
Can I ask then, is this why some people say a transfusion was the only thing that worked? Because it literally goes straight to the blood?
100%. If you have an iron infusion, exactly as you described, you're actually basically pushing iron straight into the bloodstream. You are bypassing the diet, the stomach acid, the duodenum, the ferroreductase, the divalent mineral transporter, the ferroportin, all of these things, you're going straight into the bloodstream. And for some people, that ends up being the only way they end up with enough iron, because all of these other processes which need to be completed, there's a blockage somewhere which can't be overcome. So the ferroportin is a really interesting story. It's a special doorway just for iron. It's a transport protein which only allows iron to move from the enterocyte into the bloodstream. And the thing is, if you think about it as a doorway, that doorway is closed almost 100% of the time. It only opens a tiny little crack if you have the need for iron, and then it slams shut again as soon as a tiny bit of iron has moved through. There's a protein in your blood which is produced by your liver, which is responsible for keeping that doorway shut. And that protein is called hepcidin. And the thing is that hepcidin was only kind of fully understood and named in the early 2000s. This is the interesting thing about nutritional science. It's constantly being updated. And it's often the research stage, the awesome scientists discover the hepcidin, discover the role, discover the importance, but it's still 20 years later not on our blood tests. Yeah. Well, yeah, we actually, it's not something which is really tested for, and we don't, we don't have I guess, the technology or the knowledge or the understanding yet to really easily be able to test hepcidin and to be able to examine that as part of an iron studies picture. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next decade or so with understanding hematinic biochemistry and how we can access more information. But I think where I would start at this point is with understanding the factors that regulate hepcidin. And so hepcidin is again, with my very strange brain, when I kind of teach iron biochemistry, when I think about it, I always kind of imagine that you've got this iron door which is constantly being kicked shut, and the big boot which is kicking it shut is hepcidin. So it's just constantly kick. That door cannot open. And it's only when someone takes the big boot away that the door can open a little crack and iron can make its way, can just run through quickly, and then that door slams shut again. But we think about what is it that is keeping that kicking happening. And most of the time, or in an ideal world, what should be keeping that hepcidin active is the fact that we have enough iron. So our liver will only reduce its production of hepcidin if our iron levels drop, and we need that door to open to let more iron levels in. So in a perfectly functioning body, we should have, plenty of iron all the time. If we have a bleed or an injury or we have need for more iron, then the liver should reduce its production of hepcidin, allowing the door to open, iron to rush through, and then the door closes again. But what we find is that for a lot of people, and often a lot of women, and that is a separate rabbit hole for us to go down, the kind of medical misogyny around iron levels in women's bodies. But anyway, for the time being, what we tend to see in clinical practice is an awful lot of tired women who cannot get their iron levels up no matter what they do. And often, if we have a look at their medical history and their background and their physiology, we find a strong association between women in particular living with autoimmune conditions or chronic stress or other chronic illnesses and low iron levels. And the reason for this is because one of the other major reasons we have high hepcidin levels constantly is due to inflammation. Now,
I was going to say.
Yeah. And, I bet, Alex, that you do not have a single episode of your podcast where the word inflammation is not mentioned, at least several times.
Well, and I always think about, as an explainer, because it can be such a big, scary, vague term as well.
Yeah.
But it essentially means like high alert and therefore less function.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that way we can go, we need to then think about the things that put our body biochemically on high alert and work on that, because that lets everything work better.
I mean, essentially, inflammation is an indication that your immune system is acting against something. And what is it acting against? Now, this comes right back to the beginning of our conversation when we talked about why the body is so defensive about absorbing iron. And remembering that iron is a very effective fuel source for enhancing the growth of infections. When you are in a state of inflammation, your liver doesn't have the knowledge to know, are you at the beginning of an influenza virus? Do you have a rampant bacterial infection which is overgrowing? Or do you have Hashimoto's disease?
Or diabetes? Or is it perimenopause? Like anything and it gets confused.
Exactly. And it actually doesn't matter what the cause of inflammation is. If you have any inflammation systemically, this will reduce your body's ability to absorb iron, because your liver will constantly be producing hepcidin, that boot which is kicking the door closed continually, because it is protecting you, because it thinks you are under threat, and it wants to block the absorption of iron to reduce its likelihood of fueling the rampant
whatever you're being threatened by.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So imagine you've just gotten a gnarly virus like COVID.
Yeah.
That's going to be the kind of thing where it goes, shut down. We are not giving you any more iron, because if we do, that's just going to make that an even worse experience with that virus. Is that?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
That is absolutely what your immune system is essentially thinking, what it's directing your liver to do. So it's using the liver to keep you safe by producing this hepcidin protein, which is preventing the movement of iron from the enterocytes across the basal laminal membrane into your systemic circulation. But again, it doesn't matter what the source of inflammation is. What if you're just a tired, stressed midlife woman?
Yeah.
Yeah. You say that with feeling.
Oh, I might be 49. Who knows? So it's so important to know this, right? Because, and my rabbit hole always explodes into such big picture thinking that I then struggle to come back to the next best step, because I think, the intersection of the modern woman who now has on her plate the teenagers or the young children, if they've had babies late, then they have the aging parents, then they're in the peak of their career, then they're still carrying most of the household load, either mentally or actually. And then the middle class is being stripped away by various scaredy cats who are afraid of taxing appropriately where it needs to be done. And then, and then the internet is super stressful. Like, is it any wonder we have an epidemic of iron issues? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let alone actually having a clinical diagnosis. Yeah.
And it, my goodness, so my head is like, my little feminist head is exploding with all the ways in which women are just so unjustly treated in the world of hematinics, iron repletion. There's this idea that it is perfectly acceptable for women to live with significantly lower levels of iron than men because we live in female bodies. And this idea comes from the fact that, we said earlier, the only way we ever lose iron is through the loss of blood. Now, which variety of body is regularly losing blood? It is the body of the menstruating woman. And so, therefore, there is this understanding that women biologically must be used to operating at lower levels of iron than men. And there is frustration that a woman with iron levels which would be considered to be low in a male body would not be offered any treatment or resolution for her low iron levels because she is living in a female body. So is it our birthright to function with low iron just because we live in a menstruating body? I think that's a philosophical question as much as it is a biomedical question. But if we kind of swing an evolutionary angle on this as well, I actually think there's a really interesting reason why women of fertile age have lower iron levels. And again, it comes back to the whole idea of protection.
I was just thinking about it before you said it. I don't know if you saw my brainwave. I saw the light bulb
go on. Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, we are literally more protected from the proliferation of iron in our systems, which would allow for the proliferation of any number of things because of our biological role as life givers. And it's really interesting if we then look at the physiology of the immune system during pregnancy. Oh my goodness, that is a very fun rabbit hole to go down. Because do you want to take us there briefly?
Very briefly.
I want to go there. Okay, do we have time?
Yeah. Oh my God, I've got all the time in the world, Alex.
Okay, great.
I can talk about all of these things forever. So essentially, when you become pregnant, you enter a state of mild immunosuppression because you are now harboring foreign DNA, and your immune system needs to not mount an immune attack against this growing person inside you. So essentially, you become vaguely immunosuppressed during pregnancy. That places you at greater risk of infection. Your body will naturally want to keep you at a lower iron level to protect A, the pregnancy, B, your entire system from infection. So there is a hypothesis that anemia of pregnancy is physiological, not pathological. And what we mean by that
it has a purpose to it.
It has a purpose. Yeah. So that's by no means settled science. Like I said, it's a hypothesis. But from an evolutionary perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And we know that, pregnant women are more at risk, A, of infections, B, of severe infections. We know that it is more risky to, for example, a condition we know quite a lot about at the moment, it's more risky to catch COVID if you're pregnant than if you're not pregnant, because you are more likely to experience severe COVID, let alone what it may do to the developing baby, to the actual pregnant person herself. It is more risky because of this state of immunosuppression we're in. So immunosuppression usually then goes hand in hand with reduced iron levels because, again, the body thinks it is trying to protect us. What's really interesting is that after giving birth, women become incredibly receptive to iron absorption. So many of those barriers, which we talked about before as being in place, will be reduced. So hepcidin levels will drop significantly to allow the body to replace iron, which was lost during that pregnancy, during delivery, which can often be, very messy with lots of blood loss, and to allow the now no longer pregnant woman to rebuild her iron stores. So those are some of the things that can impact.
That's so cool. That is so cool that the body's like the little port. It's opened up. It's gone. Come on, we got to fill back up. We don't have danger anymore. Let's get organized.
Exactly. Let's fill up the storeroom, which was emptied for a period of time. But then where I think we should go now is back to your earlier question: what happens to the iron in your iron tablet that you don't absorb?
Forest Superfoods is back as a podcast partner, giving you 10% off with every new subscription. You are also going to get a surprise. Every month that you have an active subscription, you will receive either a mini luxe-sized sample from their supplement range, or a gift card, or their brilliant balms. I have subscribed ever since they first partnered with us because I use moringa powder. I love their Naked Greens blend. It's cruciferous free, which really suits my body. And we use lion's mane. So it made sense to be a subscriber because you get that 10% off. And we really love the quality and their super flexi subscription. Often I don't need everything that we use, so it's very easy to jump into your account, swap something out. They even have a button that says swap for something else this month, which I love. You don't need a special code. There's no special link. This week, I'll focus on the turkey tail mushroom. If your gut isn't the right environment to sustain probiotics, they won't survive. And that is where a prebiotic can help. And interestingly enough, the turkey tail mushroom has research behind it for being just that. Australian grown, whole mushroom and mycelium roots of the mushroom, that is. No flavors, unextracted, thousands of 5-star reviews. So if you're thinking of starting your subscription and getting this brilliant bonus offer every single month when your order arrives, turkey tail may be one to consider. And a reminder, you can change what you get every single month, push something back a week or bring it forward if you've run out and you're loving it. The choice is well and truly in your hands. Yeah.
So what's really interesting is that often when it comes to discussing treatment of iron deficiency or helping to improve iron stores using iron supplements, the biggest focus in that conversation in the healthcare world is often what form of iron should I take? The thing is that if we look at all of the meta-analyses done on iron supplementation, from a population level, there actually doesn't seem to be any difference. That if we look at overall the effectiveness of iron supplements across the board, they're pretty similar. They're pretty similar in terms of efficacy when it comes to increasing iron levels, and also pretty similar when it comes to side effects. That doesn't mean that there's not individual variation.
I was going to say, because I asked last night, anyone got any questions or success stories about different iron supplementation? And it was pretty evenly split. Oh, I really found that, this pea-based iron was better for me. And I really found that these liver capsules just, were fantastic. Someone said infusions. And then a bunch of people said, like me, no deal. I can't take any of them. And so I think it really is a mixed bag. It's very individual.
Yep, absolutely. And that's always something that I think that it's a really important nuance to get across when we're looking at published research, when we look at, kind of public health health research, we're looking at population level. Population level doesn't always translate to the individual.
Yeah.
But if we take it just from that really high level, then technically most iron supplements are going to be roughly equally effective when it comes to, absorption and also side effects. So the thing is that we only absorb a really small percent of the iron which comes in via an iron supplement, no matter what form it is. And then the question, which I find is very rarely asked, is what happens to the rest of that iron? Mm-hmm. What happens to it is it ends up in the toilet, but it's got to pass through the rest of your intestinal tract. So, quick visualization of the intestinal tract. We've got the stomach at the top. We're back in the intestines. We've got the stomach at the top. Stomach then opens into the intestines, which are, all of the long folds of tube which are curled inside your, your abdomen. And the upper part of the digestive tract, the small intestine, this is where the absorption happens, and your iron absorption happens in the first few centimeters of that intestinal tract. You've got dozens of meters of intestine still to go. Mm-hmm. So any iron that is not absorbed in the first few centimeters still has to travel a long way to exit your body. And the thing is that as it's traveling through the rest of the small intestines and through the large intestines, it's actually causing oxidative damage all the way through. But it's doing something else as well, and that is that it's disturbing the composition of your microbiome. So your microbiome is the collection of microbes which line largely your large intestines. We actually have microbes all over our body, in every nook and cranny, on every surface, in every liquid, but the most significant collection is in the large intestine, the gastrointestinal microbiome. And that's usually what people mean when they say the microbiome. They're usually talking about the gastrointestinal microbiome. When the unabsorbed iron from your iron supplement, or if you've had a really big iron-rich meal from your unabsorbed dietary iron, when that iron is passing through your microbiome, it's influencing which species of microbes are able to thrive. Because remember, iron is a fuel source for different microbes. What we know is that in someone with what we call fractional iron deficiency, so then only absorbing a tiny percentage or not any at all of the iron that they're taking, we associate this with a less healthy composition of the microbiome. The reason here is that unabsorbed iron fuels the growth of less desirable microbes and suppresses the proliferation of microbes we associate with health. So someone who is taking an iron supplement and it's not being well absorbed, if we look at, again, studies of the microbiome at a population level, we find that they are less likely to have healthy levels of lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, which are two genera of bacteria which are associated with a healthy microbiome. They're more likely to have high levels of things like E. coli and other less desirable microbes. Mm-hmm. So again, this is not talking about kind of the individual level, but again, if we look at that more kind of population level research, we find an association between unabsorbed iron and a more unbalanced, if you like, microbiome. So that iron that you're not absorbing in your supplement, not only is it not ending up in your blood, but it's also having a negative impact on your microbiome as it's passing through the digestive tract. And the thing is that your microbiome is also influential in measuring or, modulating your inflammation levels.
Wow. So you can end up in a real catch-22 here without even realizing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if your hepcidin's high, right, to keep the door closed?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so if your hepcidin's high because there's something going on and your body feels like it's threatened, the door's closed, so you're not absorbing, so it's going, traveling, causing all this haywire stuff, including microbiome disruption, because your inflammation exists that's causing the stress that's causing the lack of absorption.
Yeah. And to be honest, your unabsorbed iron supplement is making everything worse because it's triggering more and more inflammation.
So does everyone now need to be thinking, oh my God, supplementing iron is the devil? I like to go to the extreme to call people back off the ledge.
Yeah. Off the ledge, everyone, off the ledge. Look, I think an iron supplement is not the first place to start. Mm-hmm. And if you are taking an iron supplement, the research shows us that you will get better results with a lower dose and no more frequently than every 48 hours.
Okay.
So you take a lower dose and you take it every second day or every third day. Mm-hmm. And the reason is it takes about 48 hours for hepcidin levels to subside after they have been triggered by that large amount of iron arriving in your body in the form of an iron supplement.
There's so many metaphors. I'm picturing like the gnarly clipboard guy going, hey, we did not authorize this. Where is this coming from? You are not allowed in here, or the bouncer. Yeah,
totally. Absolutely. Yeah. And so I think, again, it comes back to, my whole medical and healthcare philosophy, which is understand human homeostasis and work with your diet and your lifestyle before resorting to supplements. Your first port of call should not be to take an iron supplement. And I actually feel like far fewer people should be taking iron than actually are. I think an iron supplement should be very carefully deployed, only under certain circumstances. And for a lot of people, an iron infusion may be a better option. Because then you're bypassing all of that intestinal inflammation and all of that microbiome disturbance and all of those other disturbers of homeostasis which can occur.
Okay. And so can we then come back, if we are going to talk about diet and lifestyle, but our very start of the chat was around how it's not really going to be so much the steak that influences it. So it's not so much, like I was thinking, is not so much about diet. So when we now are saying it is about diet and lifestyle first, what are you actually meaning there?
That's a really good question. Look at the totality of your diet. Is it a diet which is providing the nutrients necessary for the construction of hydrochloric acid, healthy mucous membrane tissue? Mm-hmm. Is it a diet which is going to be providing nutrients more associated with an anti-inflammatory impact or a pro-inflammatory impact? Is it a diet which has a high glycemic index, which is then going to be causing higher levels of insulin? And is this, this itself is inflammatory. So again, when we talk about diet and lifestyle, we're not just honing in on the precise number of milligrams of iron coming into your diet, but is this a diet, for example, are you eating at least 30 plant foods a week, which are going to be providing lots of different substrates for a more diverse microbiome, which is associated with lower levels of inflammation? So it's, again, it's really tricky because I don't like to promote the idea that everybody has to be obsessed with what they're eating. Yeah. And that also we all have the privilege to eat 7 different varieties of green vegetables every week. But again, we're not just talking about the components of the diet. We're also talking about factors in your life which can impact things like stress and sleep and hormone regulation. We haven't even mentioned the word perimenopause yet. Like, how can 240-something women have a conversation without mentioning the word perimenopause?
I'm proud of us for actually making it this far. That was, I don't think that's an oversight. I think that's a wow in this day and age.
Yes. Yeah. So there are so many factors which can impact your levels of inflammation and your microbiome. And, as someone who works, my day job is microbiome education. Yeah. I am very much keeping a microbial eye on every single physiological process that we discuss.
Okay. So can I ask you a bit of a sidestep question here? Because it does come up. It does come up often. And that is when people are seriously inflamed, there's a large group of people that seem to find solace, comfort, literally physically, mentally, in doing something as extreme as a carnivore diet situation. As much as there are people who, you know, almost become evangelized by like a medical medium sort of raw, let's just, you know, eat all these veggies, kilos and kilos of fruits and veggies. Like, how can we reconcile these extremes with, you know, I almost feel like polarization is profitable no matter what the topic is. And so what is, like, moderation just isn't sexy. Eat a huge variety of foods isn't sexy. You can't protocolize that. It's actually just go to your market and get what's there, a bit of everything. But why do people feel driven? Like, there's obviously a reason people feel so desperate that they explore those extremes. Is there anything we need to be thinking about when it comes to iron and the functioning of our intestines, and when we choose some of these things, like just some blind spots we might have going in?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. There is nothing interesting in saying that you should eat a balanced diet with plenty of fruit and veg. Wow. You know, but that, to be honest, that is the most solid piece of public health advice we can give the entire population. That's it. Is eat more vegetables is probably it. Eat more plant foods. And that is about as like you said, as unsexy as it can be. In terms of what drives people, I think there's so many things. I think there's, you know, there are a lot of people who feel really unwell and who feel really dismissed by their healthcare providers. And if they are not feeling heard, or they're not seeing results with the various lines of inquiry that they're following with their GP or with the standard healthcare system, in this age of, you know, internet availability, there are a lot of rabbit holes they can follow with a lot of really powerful personalities who are incredibly charismatic and convincing and can absolutely promise you that following their extreme way of eating or living is the answer to every single ailment under the sun. And this is why I think it's really important to, again, come back to what does the science show us? What does the epidemiology show us? What does public health research show us? And again, we just acknowledge that public health research is studying the population, not the individual. But the one thing we're really, really, really confident in when it comes to the microbiome is that diversity equals strength. And what that means is that when we look at microbial analysis across various populations, we find the strongest correlation between diversity in the microbiome. So the more different types of bugs you've got living in your gut, the more this correlates in the research with improved health outcomes. How do we obtain more diversity in our microbiome? Eating more plant foods. It's as simple as that. There's a reason why people who eat more plant foods live longer. And well, there are several reasons. One of them is they're eating more antioxidants over the course of their life. Another one, really interestingly, actually comes back to our conversation. This kind of blows the minds of a lot of people. There is a direct correlation between low hemoglobin levels, that's that protein that carries iron around in our bloodstream, and longevity. Essentially, the less iron you have in your body, the longer you live. And the reason for that, again, comes back to iron's role as an oxidant. That the more iron you have, the more your body is being exposed to oxidative damage. So from an oxidative or aging perspective, a carnivore diet, terrible idea. From a microbiome diversity perspective, carnivore diet, terrible idea. Why do some people feel good on a carnivore diet? Well, that's usually very short-lived, that feeling of wellness, and often it's related to what they've taken out of their diet. So if someone is just eating meat, we're not eating processed carbohydrates. They're not eating a lot of junk food. They're not having, they're not drinking sodas. They're not, they're not eating processed
kind of like a
foods.
raw vegan diet. You know, you've gotten
exactly.
rid, if you've made that commitment to any whole food in its entirety, it's about what you've left out all of a sudden that is going to account for feeling fantastic either way for a bit. Yeah.
It absolutely is. But it's not, the extreme diet of any description is unlikely to be associated with long-term health. But again, there's no accounting for the individual impact.
Which, you know, it really speaks to if you're feeling great and you are eating in a way that would be considered to be quite odd, left field, extreme, but you are feeling great, like could the blueprint there just be make sure you're getting regular bloods and really checking in and
I mean, for sure. And, you know, I've seen people's bodies do really weird things, you know.
I bet.
We are odd. Humans are very strange. And individual variation is very much a thing. But if we're looking, you know, if anyone is looking to take advice, then the best advice that I could possibly give you from this distance is eat more plant food.
And then it comes back to proper preparation, like soak the lentils if you're going to eat lentils. Don't just, you know, flash cook them in 10 minutes and expect to never have gas. If you did that, you know, like we've lost those arts of actually, you know, converting the plant foods.
And, you know, something else that's interesting is when we prepare our own food, we know that we also digest it better. And a big part of that, I think, is that, you know, I talked earlier about digestion starting in the mouth. Digestion actually starts in the brain. And it starts with the planning of the meal and the handling of the food. And also a lot of people find the actual physical process of preparing a meal quite stabilizing on the nervous system and helps to prepare your body for eating. But there's also something that's, I think, really interesting if we bring the microbiome back into it as well. When you are cooking, you cannot help but put your own microbiome into the food you prepare. So essentially, and this always blows my mind when I talk about this, in every family, in every group of people living together, there is a dominant microbiome in that house. And the longer those people live together, the more similar their microbial inhabitants become, because usually the person who is preparing the food is essentially slowly shaping the microbiome of everyone else in that house.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Well, my guys are lucky. I've got a super diverse microbiome. Yeah. I know that from testing.
Yes.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Yeah. So, Rebecca, can we go back to the duodenum? Did I say that right? Yes. Because it sounds like this is a pretty pivotal space to nourish and make sure is in good working order. What are some of the most basic things we can do to support that?
So this is the, again, just to kind of set the scene again, this is your landscape of those rolling green hills, where we need the hills, the trees, and the leaves on the trees.
And if any of those things are missing and we start being recommended proton pump inhibitors, then we end up with less, stomach acid. And then the start of this journey over the rolling hills is marred.
It's not good. But the thing is, lots of things can damage that landscape. And this is really interesting if we come back to iron. If I see someone with consistently low iron levels and the supplements are not working and the diet is not working and nothing is working, the very first test they need to ask for from their GP is they need to have celiac screening. Because low iron is a big waving red flag for celiac disease. And the reason for this is because what happens physiologically in celiac disease is destruction. All the leaves come off the trees, essentially. Destruction of the microvilli. And this, remember, is where all of those digestive enzymes are being produced, including ferroreductase, including lactase. So another symptom of celiac disease is lactose intolerance, because you're not producing the lactase to break down the lactose. So anything that can cause physical damage to the duodenum, like celiac disease, needs to be investigated. Other things which can cause damage to the duodenum include things as, again, as mundane and boring as someone taking lots of anti-inflammatory drugs or alcohol. Alcohol is one of the, I suppose, most damaging substances we can ingest when it comes to the health of the duodenum. Other things that can cause problems can include, it's essentially anything that you are allergic or intolerant to. We know that there is an association between, for example, non-celiac gluten intolerance and low iron levels as well. So it's not just celiac disease that can cause that. Overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine. As I said before, that the biggest site of microbial life in the human body is the large intestine. If microbes are present in large numbers in the small intestine, where they should only be present in small numbers, then this can also impact the health of the duodenum and impair absorption pathways as well. So that can cause problems. Stress is one of the most damaging things that we can do to our digestive process. What we find, if someone is in a constant state of sympathetic stimulation or that fight or flight, mechanism, then this reduces the expression of digestive secretions. So you will then be less able to break down the components of your diet into digestible, little kind of substances which can cross into the bloodstream. Impaired mucus production. Who knew? Mucus is so important. Mucus is one of the most important things for absorption of nutrients because it essentially acts like a sticky trap and holds nutrients in contact with those digestive enzymes being produced. So if you're not producing enough mucus or enough of a substance called secretory immunoglobulin A on the lining of your digestive tract, then you're also going to be less able to absorb micronutrients like iron. And stress can be a big factor there.
And can I ask what that feels like so it can sort of bring the biochemistry to life for someone? So I'm going through my life day to day. What would make me make the connection with, maybe my mucus is low on my, what does it actually feel like for that to be
I wonder if anyone
lacking.
has had that thought. My mucus is low. So you're not going to feel an absence of mucus just from it being expressed or secreted. What you're more likely to experience is gastritis, indigestion, pain after eating, reflux, feeling that food isn't sitting well. Something that a lot of people experience is, say, when they swallow a tablet or capsule and they feel like it's stuck in their throat. It's not, but they are perhaps not producing enough lubricating mucus to allow the smooth passage of that tablet as it's being swallowed, and it's essentially causing a little abrasion as it's going down. So essentially feeling that swallowing or eating is painful could indicate inflammation of that mucous membrane tissue. In the lower digestive tract, you may be experiencing more gas production, more kind of cramping pain. And then if you want to look in the toilet or the experience of what's happening, kind of coming out the other end, you may be finding that the stool is less formed, often there's an association with constipation as well, because mucus kind of once again eases the passage of stool. So someone who's having difficulty with defecation could indicate that their mucous membrane is not producing enough mucus as well. So it's not going to be like a single, experience. It's going to be just more of dysregulation. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, live with a lot of intestinal dysregulation a lot of the time.
And so given this is so integral to our iron transport and uptake working efficiently, where do we start with supporting that better, fixing that? I founded Low Tox Life in 2009, and as the community grew, I started to identify areas that people needed structured learning. And that is when the first e-course, Go Low Tox, was born in 2014. Since then, I've worked with scientists and health professionals to bring you low-cost courses to help you shortcut your goals with whatever you're challenged by right now. So whether you're new to going low tox and you'd love a framework and some really helpful suggestions across 22 different topics covering everyday life. Or maybe you're working on an inflammation picture and you just want some help to calm the farm. Whether you're on a fertility journey, either having trouble or wanting to optimize, we literally have courses for these and more. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the course tab and enjoy.
Well, I would start with increasing the number of plant foods that someone is eating, because again, every different type of plant food is providing different substrates or fuel sources for different microbes, because we really want to be enhancing that microbial diversity. Again, we know that a more diverse microbiome associated with less inflammation, more regulated immune system. We look at the totality of the diet. We look at making sure that we're limiting substances which are less helpful, like alcohol, like our processed foods, like our sugary drinks, etc. But we can also look at introducing a very specific strain of probiotic bacteria as well, which has been found to significantly enhance the availability, the bioavailability, the uptake of iron. And that is a strain of bacteria called Lactobacillus plantarum 299V. It's a probiotic bacteria which has, in 7 clinical trials, been shown to enhance the absorption of both supplemental iron but also dietary iron. And there are several different things it's doing. So first of all, as it's in the small intestine, it's releasing a metabolite or a byproduct, if you like, called phenolactic acid, which actually enhances the release of ferroreductase. So it's making that brush border, the leaves on the trees, it's making that area more effective at reducing our dietary iron from the ferric iron, that Fe3+, to the ferrous, that Fe2+. So the first thing it's doing is helping the duodenum absorb iron. But that particular strain of probiotic is also very anti-inflammatory. It's also helping to regulate hepcidin levels, which is then having an impact on that iron door and allowing more iron into the body. Probiotics are also a really good way to help enhance the health of mucous membrane tissue throughout the entire digestive tract. And, the world of probiotics, that's the world I spend my entire, professional life engaged in. And there's so much to talk about, the different individual strains and their ability to interact with that mucous membrane environment. Some of them, like that strain I mentioned, Plantarum 299V, there are others like Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, Lactobacillus plantarum 6595. Every individual strain of bacteria is doing something different, but some of them will interact with goblet cells, and goblet cells are my favorite cells in the body just because of their name.
Oh, I'm picturing like a little medieval kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's because that's what shape they are. That's why they're named goblet cells, because they are actually goblet shaped. These are cells just under the surface of your mucous membrane, which actually secrete mucin proteins, which your body then uses to make that mucus. So certain strains of probiotic will actually essentially talk to those goblet cells and cause them to produce more of these mucin proteins, which then results in more mucus being expressed. So you can actually use different strains of probiotic to create an environment where iron is more likely to be absorbed.
Can I come back? It's just got me thinking about why we end up needing to focus so hard on probiotics. Could it be that our SAD diets, literally standard Australian, standard American, standard Anglo, I call it really, because we've really screwed up the white people on the diet front over the years, and it just the narrowing of our food to basically meat and potatoes, or meat and grains, or meat in a pasta, or meat in a rice, and sometimes like the token veggies as well, has narrowed the diversity, which has then caused plant foods to be aggravating because we now don't have the little processing plant variety that we need. And so that's why plants become a problem, and then you narrow it even further to not have that immediate aggravation, but you're then narrowing the diversity even further to compound the problem over time. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, you've now allowed me to step onto one of my other favorite soapboxes, which is the vanishing human microbiome, that every generation of humans is being born with essentially a less diverse and narrower microbiome than the generation before.
Yeah.
And we definitely are seeing an environment where what we refer to as ancestral species of microbial bacteria have been lost. If we were able to go back in time and analyze the microbiota of our grandparents and great-grandparents' generation, we would find that they had several times the number of different microbes resident in their guts as we do now. And there are a number of reasons for that. It's not just one thing, but there are lots of factors working against microbial diversity.
Well,
in modern life.
Environmental toxins, the indoor built environment not being built properly, and so you end up with a whole bunch of mold, which is awful for the microbiome.
And then the substances we use to deal with that mold. We know that one of the factors which has consistently been implicated in lack of microbial diversity is the use of antibacterial products in cleaning the home and also on the body. So that's a factor that doesn't help, but it's on a more, a larger scale. It's the big change in food production methods as well. So industrialized farming is reducing our exposure to microbes coming from soil, coming from animals, coming from different parts of the food production cycle. We also, and again, I never want anyone to feel any sense of blame, but antibiotic use, we know.
No, and I'm really glad you said that word. Yeah.
We also,
we just had a little, you can pick it up again. I think we just ended up going over the top of each other.
It's, again, I always, when I have this conversation, I always want to start with no one can, I really don't want to trigger any kind of sense of guilt. But one of the ways that we compose our microbiome in two ways, vertically and horizontally. Vertical transmission is from mother to child. And this occurs during pregnancy. It's a myth that babies are born sterile. They are not. There is a fetal microbiome. There's a placental microbiome. There's an amniotic fluid microbiome. So during pregnancy, the developing baby is coming into contact with the maternal microbiome. And this is the first place where microbes are being transferred to this new person. Antibiotic use during pregnancy is one of the factors that can impact that. We also know here in Australia, we have a really high rate of intrapartum antibiotic exposure. So babies being exposed to antibiotics either during pregnancy or during delivery.
Not me, me, IV, son.
Yeah. That's right. And that's really common here in Australia.
Super really common. I had a naturopath who jumped right on that and made sure the diversity was then built from the ground up because of that procedure. But a lot of people aren't. It is privileged. I think a lot of us don't get how spending $250 on an initial consult is literally out of the hands of 90% of people.
Absolutely. Which is why I think education is so important and accessibility.
And improving public health.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in increasing funding for public health research and, like you said before, taxes, better resources, better healthcare systems, better availability of services and high quality foods and information and all of this. This should not be the domain of people who have a lot of expendable income. This should be available for everyone. But if we get back to what's going on with the microbiome, we've got, antibiotic exposure during pregnancy and birth. We've got, and Australia is not so bad for this, but overall in developed nations, declining rates of breastfeeding and declining length of duration of breastfeeding. Breast milk itself is the best probiotic and prebiotic you will ever get. And it is absolutely, life-changing for the rest of someone's life when it comes to establishing a healthily composed microbiome and the relationship that microbiome has with immune function. So supporting new mothers to maintain their breastfeeding goals, if, that's what they would like to do, that becomes, again, I think a really important part of a functioning public health system. Then we also look at It's really interesting. The vertical transmission, again, from mother to child is pregnancy, birth, skin to skin, breastfeeding. And then we see the horizontal transmission of microbes. And this is through the diet, through the environment, interactions with animals, interactions with people, travel. So, something that's really good we can do for our microbiome is go to different places and eat the local foods in those different places. And this
I had a fantastic conversation with Diane Minich about that exact thing.
Yes.
She's like, oh, my friends always say, but what if you can't get she's like, I don't want to be able to get the regular food that I eat at home. Yeah. The whole point is, and, if you think back to our more nomadic times, that's exactly what we were doing. We were seasonally moving from location to location, and that was giving us that biodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also had a lot more, contact with the process and manufacture of food. We would have been eating potatoes that still had clods of earth on them, and lentils with bits of earth still mixed into them, and we would have come into contact with more microbes from the local environment. We also would have had more contact with animals. And it's really interesting when there's a lot of research looking at the relationship between the microbiome and atopic or allergic conditions. Asthma is probably the most researched. And we find really, really strong relationships between, and in Australia, some of this research was done, between, again, that exposure to antibiotics in that intrapartum period and asthma risk. There's a strong relationship there that babies who are exposed to antibiotics at birth or shortly after birth are significantly more likely to experience asthma in their early childhood. But one of the factors which is associated with a reduced likelihood of experiencing asthma is growing up with pets in the house. And it's not just any pets, it is particularly furred mammals. And it is especially dogs and cats offer the highest protection, and it is especially dogs over cats. So as a dog person, I love to talk about this, but it's a very strong association in the research. There's a factor that's even more protective against asthma than dogs, and that is what is in the research is referred to as cattle dust. And essentially it's going to be airborne dried cattle manure. Breathing that in is associated with reduced risk of asthma, again, because of the microbial exposure.
Biodiversity, plants and animals. Right. Here we are again. Yeah. It's not sexy, but it's a thing. Yeah. So, wow. Oh my gosh, we have gone so many places, Rebecca. I think this is really exciting to have stepped through it so thoroughly to help people really start to understand the major players of why our iron might be off and why you might feel like this lone person who's like, but I've done everything right. And now, hopefully with a bit of new knowledge, a whole bunch more things to consider. If we could do a couple of things this week, really simple things, that would help our bodies function more efficiently, I feel like I know the first answer here is look at what's making you super stressed out and remove it, which I will say in this particular social media climate is get off the phone and really just tone that down. But a couple of things that are more practitioner kind of specific recommendations, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, the first one, again, not very interesting, but the most important thing of all, eat more plants. It's always the number one piece of advice. Have a look at your diet, count how many different plant foods you have in it, and aim to increase that significantly. And a plant food doesn't have to be a whole new species of vegetable. It can be as simple as eating both green apples and red apples, because they're each providing different substrates for different microbes. Or
if you always buy almonds, switch it up, get some walnuts the next week.
Have your matcha with oat milk instead of almond milk, or both, have both. And you're just inviting essentially more microbes to come and live inside you by giving them more fuel sources. So my number one thing would be eat more plant foods. And then a very specific, I suppose, other thing would be, is there if there's a particular therapeutic outcome you're looking to achieve, say you need to enhance iron absorption, have a look at a specific strain of probiotic bacteria which has been shown to do that. And if it is iron absorption, then look for a probiotic containing Lactobacillus plantarum 299V. And that is a strain. Every strain of probiotic bacteria is doing something different. You've got to find the right strain for the job that you need to do. And that is a specific strain that we know from many pieces of research has been found to significantly enhance the absorption of iron.
So it's like the BP Ultimate fuel for the, you know, like the one that like removes the impurities and keeps the car running smoothly. We need to think of the strains that actually help us do that as well. And can I ask you a qualifying question on the eat more plant food for the person who then goes, but plant foods seem to really aggravate me. Our pediatrician actually had the advice to start small. Don't think you need to eat a freaking chickpea salad today. But could you have 2 chickpeas?
Yes,
and then next week have 3, and then the week after that have 4. Rome wasn't built in a day, and the microbiome was also not healed in a day.
Exactly. If you can only have half a teaspoon of lentils, that is half a teaspoon of new substrates for bacteria in your gut. Amazing. What a great place to start and build up from there. And the other thing is the more we work on improving the microbiome and the health of the lining of the digestive tract, the more you will be able to tolerate foods that have previously not been so friendly to you.
Such a great roller coaster, an intestinal roller coaster. Thank you so much for being our very wise guide on this show, Rebecca. Brilliant work. And I really just so appreciate the time you've taken to so thoroughly take us through it all.
Oh, anytime. We can geek out together anytime, Alex.
Oh, there's going to be a part 2 on something. Don't you worry about that. Thank you for joining us in listening to this week's show. If you're not already subscribed or following the show on whatever platform you listened, please do that now. It helps enormously in terms of getting this show out to more people. Another way you can connect and support the work we do so that we can support you in your low tox life is join us in the Low Tox Club. You'll get access to amazing member masterclasses where we invite some of our best show guests for a live Q&A with members. You also have great shopping discounts from low tox businesses and honestly, the nicest low tox community Facebook group that exists on the internet. I do hope you join us there. It costs just the price of a coffee a month on average. Head to lowtoxlife.com, hit the Explore tab, and Low Tox Club is the first option there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.